is the latest going on with Mt. Gox and the recovery efforts among creditors?
It's still a mess. The Japanese courts and the entire kind of process is a little bit more complicated than it needs to be. And I don't foresee it changing anytime soon.
So is anyone going to get their money back? Some of these people that lost money in Mt. Gox, and is it possible that some of them will get extremely rich in the process eventually?
I think the likelihood of us all getting kind of ripped off is very, very great because of the issues related to the valuation of Bitcoin as it sits now compared to when the attack happened. They're trying to give us the value of what the value was then as opposed to what it is now, which, as everyone can attest to, is significantly different.
Yeah.
So, Jonathan, is there anything in place now legally that would prevent the next Mt. Gox event from happening?
That's a really interesting question. I was part of the New York DFS hackathon or tech sprint last week, and we kind of looked at, kind of compliance elements for, dealing with FAFSA and all these kind of travel rules. But there wasn't a real big focus on, preventing hacks and those types of security breaches. And I think for centralized exchanges, that's something that we do need to pay attention to, because we always are, especially those of us that had to deal with the Mt. Gox issue, know that you shouldn't keep your crypto on an exchange, centralized exchange. And so, when focusing on this entire area of centralization, we don't really want to stick with those types of exchanges as best we can, because it's good to get in and off of a position, but it's not good to stay there long term if, God forbid, something happens. And I think that, in the industry overall, there's been a really good self-regulatory push, but not necessarily so much from the actual regulators. And that's primarily because the technology is still very new to them. We haven't even gotten to the world of decentralization of DEXs and, NFT platforms yet. So I think for the cybersecurity element of everything, I think we're moving along, but I think it's based on, kind of the hard lessons learned through Mt. Gox, through Quadriga, through all of these other exchanges that have kind of went up in smoke.
So regulatory-wise, what would need to be put in place if you would say, like, here's the biggest thing that we need to do to prevent it?
That's an excellent question. So I am a fan of regulation, but I'm not a fan of over-regulation. And I think if even the folks at New York DFS tried to take on this type of topic, it would be something that would require significant resources, preferably at a national level, which, of course, New York wouldn't have the jurisdiction to do. And so that's where I think we are in the need of a real kind of global change, specifically from our Congress. But I don't think that that's going to happen given what they've got to deal with coronavirus and everything else going on. I imagine that it's going to be a process of not necessarily focusing on the centralized exchanges like FinCEN was and Steve Mnuchin before the end of the previous administration. I think it's going to be this weird kind of amalgamation of what does the CFTC say, what does the SEC say, and what does FinCEN say. And that's going to primarily evolve around custody and the self-custody of wallets and things of that nature. Now, the SEC has done a really bang-up job with FINRA, and I have to give them props for that, of basically approving an ATS late last year. And when we get to that kind of level, which there are several people working on, that's when we're going to see some really kind of interesting topics of, how does banks hold this stuff? How, the OCC has come out and said that, those banks can actually hold crypto, which is absolutely fascinating, especially considering Mr. O'Leary was just on here talking about, the provenance of some of these assets. And there is, respectfully, a money laundering concern, absolutely. But I think that any well-informed either regulator or investigator will tell you that they much prefer crypto than cold hard fiat, because fiat is much harder to track. So with that being said, I think that what we'll see is an evolution of the entire space, kind of from a custody perspective and not necessarily so much from a cybersecurity centralization of exchanges perspective.